is Michael Mullen. I'm 47, and I was presumably born in Seoul, Korea, but I was, as many adoptees, the story is I was left on the police station steps in Seoul. I was not in orphanage very long. I think I was maybe dropped off when I was like 2.5 years old, then I was adopted by the time I was 3 around. And I grew up mostly in Spokane, Washington, with 3 other kids in my family, white family. And all 3 of the kids were domestic adoptees. They were all white, and I was the youngest, but so we were all adopted. I actually moved to Korea a couple times while I was in college and right after college, and I lived there for like 1.5 years. When I went there, it never really occurred to me to search, and I just thought, well, this is going to be like a huge mountain to climb, and I don't really want to make a lot of effort to come up short and really expend all the energy. So just recently, I have become a lot more interested in my adoption, and I did ask for my papers for the first time. This was maybe 2 years ago. And on the paperwork, it said that my mother had been killed, I guess, and it said something like this was, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was that my mother was killed and my aunt was raising me, but she couldn't do it anymore, and so this is why I was being abandoned. And so I felt like when you hear these stories about being left on the police station steps, I feel like that was like a little bit of extra detail that is not usually included when like, 'cause a lot of these stories are really not true, or at least they're only half true. And so I feel like, with that kind of additional detail, I really didn't want to continue looking, and what felt like already was going to be a difficult search would be even more difficult and probably not going to turn anything. So I never looked. Part of not searching was I didn't want to have an answer which was, you can never find your mother. I didn't want to investigate that further to either try to confirm that or not. There seems to be a bit of a stigma around wanting to talk about your adoption. And what I mean by that is people, and I think this goes back to my own experience as a child, but also more recently, which is people assume that if you're not talking about it and you are having a successful life, that means you have had a great adoption and there's no problems. But if you are talking about it, then it must be that you had issues and therefore you have problems with it. I mean, so one of, as I mentioned, it was only a few years ago I started really talking about adoption in my life. And one of the reactions I would get from people was, oh, I didn't know you had issues about adoption. And I would just, and they didn't mean anything negative about it. These were people who I liked and they liked me. They were just surprised really, and that was how they took it. And I think that's not uncommon. And I would have to kind of, to the extent I was willing to, I would have to kind of take them through a mental exercise to reorient how they would think about it, which was like, I'd be like, so if I was a 40-year-old and I suddenly, say I was Jewish, and I suddenly was never very Jewish all my life, but all of a sudden when I was 40, I was like, man, I really want to get involved in my synagogue, and I want to get, I'm really feeling that this is a major part of who I am. You wouldn't be like, oh, I didn't know you had issues with being Jewish. You'd be like, hey, this is great. You're like finding, you're getting back to your roots. This is fantastic. And so there's a real difference in how we view that. And so I think I'm not sure, why we still kind of have that idea that adoptees should be perfectly happy with not understanding their roots and maybe not thinking about their biological family, things like that. But I feel like there's definitely that stigma around it, kind of a feeling that if you are thinking about those things, there must be something wrong that you need to work out. And then once you work that out, then you'll be over that. So there was a level of discomfort in myself that I wasn't able to face, I think. So you have the Asian face, but a non-Asian name, and just things like that, where you don't maybe act very Asian, so people remind you about that, and things like that. So you want to not associate with people who are going to remind you of that stuff, right? And so I realized that I had met other adoptees, but I had kind of put some barrier between us. And so like I had this sudden feeling like, oh my gosh, these are the people that like I belong to, and this is my community, and it was really eye-opening for me. So when a couple years ago, when I became aware of wanting to deal with and think about my adoption more, like I really needed to be around adoptees at that moment. So that's I think how I learned, and so that's why I think these things, like it took me 40 years to get to the point where I could really think about how adoption was affecting me. My name is Michael Mullen, and this is my Korean American story.